Folks, welcome to the Crossing Swords podcast presented by Batavia Downs Gaming and Hotel. And don't you worry, I am not here solo. And the man I'm with did not smoke a pack of cigarettes before this. This is the man who is the voice, the face, the written word of West New York athletics, whether it's the Buffalo Bills, the Buffalo Sabres, Canisius basketball, St. Francis football. The man knows West New York sports. Here he is, the man, the myth, the legend, Mike Bunt. Bunty, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. That was quite the introduction. And thanks for pointing out that my voice has been gone for 3 weeks. I sound horrible. It does sound like I'm smoking a pack a day, but no cigs for me. This is just a cold that just won't go away, but hopefully it'll be back to normal soon.
And Bunty, I'm not a cigarette guy, but these Buffalo Sabres some nights make me want to down 15 cartons of cigarettes. We're sitting at 8-9-1, which isn't bad. Not horrible, not great. But how are you feeling? The team's kind of floating around 500 the past couple of weeks now. Got a little bit of stretch for the West Coast trip. But how are you feeling right now, 18 games into the season?
So we said at the 20-game mark, we would kind of have an idea of what this team is. And right now, it's still pretty inconsistent. They've been streaky of late. They won 3, lost 3, won 3. Then in that last few games since, it's kind of gone back and forth. I think watching this team, that they have talent, they have ability. Tage has shown that he is a premier goal scorer. The top line has a lot of potential. The third line has been pretty solid, but it's still up and down far too often. And it looks like a team that's trying to still figure out what they are. Now, I have an idea what they're trying to be, but still a team that's mediocre. I think that they have a much better chance of finding themselves than they did last year, because the Eastern Conference is just a complete shit show right now. And there's going to be a lot of teams that are in that cluster fighting for the final 2 spots in the playoffs. So I think if this team does at any point of the season figure things out, they'll have a shot. But at this current time, you don't know what you're going to see on the ice on any given night.
No, and I think that's kind of been the thing that's really plagued this team in recent history, where, we've seen flashes of excellency, and then they take a couple steps back. I mean, last night's game against Philadelphia, I think, is an outlier from what we've seen the rest of the season. Like, over the course of 82 games, Bunty, you are going to lay an egg. You're going to have nights where things just aren't coming together. They didn't look good. It took them until the last couple minutes to find any sort of, similarity of what we've seen this season. And that just happens, for better or worse. You're missing Tage Thompson. Your all-star goalie is, out of commission for a little bit. Like that's going to happen. And I think if you told us before, or when Thompson went down, that the Sabres would split those 2 games without him, we would take that, I think, any day of the week. That you're missing Tage Thompson. I think before their previous win, they didn't win a single game this year when he didn't score. So that was not a good omen going into that, but they found a way to get that win without him. Ryan McLeod, I think, took a really big step on that first line. Bunty, what are your thoughts kind of been with him taking that jump? I know we've kind of been peddling the Ryan McLeod as good train for really off the get-go, but he made that jump to play with Peterka and Tuck, and that top line didn't seem like they took a step back at all.
No, and Ryan McLeod is a very good player, and there's reasons to be encouraged when the Sabres traded for him. And really, honestly, the only people that didn't really like the Ryan McLeod trade were people that don't know about Ryan McLeod, the hockey player, and those that were so enamored by prospects that they've never seen play in the NHL that they just assumed that Savoy would become some superstar. And maybe he will be a good player in the NHL. I think he could be. But right now, Ryan McLeod has been one of the best players on the Sabres team. He's not going to be a point-per-game player at the NHL level, but he's a responsible two-way player who has scoring potential. And in the past, maybe we didn't really see much of that in Edmonton because of where he was playing and the guys that they have in front of him. But I think Ryan McLeod could be a 40 to 50-point player at the NHL level, given the proper situations. He has incredible speed. You can see he has some playmaking ability. And he's had success so far this year with Zucker and Greenway. And now you're putting him with some top-line minutes with guys like Peterka and Tuck, and it's still continuing to carry over. So what's even more impressive about that is you're starting to see that a guy like that has versatility throughout the lineup. And that's really something that has plagued this Sabres team in recent years, is that they had a lot of guys that could only play with a few players. There was very few guys on the Sabres in recent years that you could really switch up and down the lineup and continue to have success. And on this team, guys like McLeod, guys like Zucker, Tuck, Peterka, they have the ability to switch things up. So what that does is it gives a coach like Lindy the ability to flip the lineup more often. The only two guys that you're really worried about right now, though, is that second line. And unfortunately, with Cousins and Quinn, you haven't really been able to find it with anybody. But as far as McLeod and the question you answered, very encouraging signs. And he's one of the reasons why I do have some hope for this team going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of that second line, I think that's been a massive concern for all fans this season. Zach Benson comes back, and I feel like we've seen a little bit of an improvement, at least with Dylan Cousins. I think he's scored 3 goals in his last 5 games, something along those lines, where that second line, while it's not to where we want it to be, and it's not where it should be, Bunty, do you think those strides have been taken where we've seen a little bit of progress? Obviously, Jack Quinn is still snake bit. That it's still not the second line we envisioned, that we hope, the kid line of years prior. But have they shown you anything the past couple of games to give you optimism that this could work, that they are going in the right direction? Or are you ready just to blow that whole thing up and send them as far away as you can?
I mean, I don't know what you do with it at this point. Dylan Cousins has shown me improvement over the last 7 years. Dylan Cousins was never a question to me. Like, for me, it was always, is he going to figure it out? When is he going to figure it out? Like, everybody acts like Dylan Cousins is this bum now. The dude had 30 plus goals and close to 70 points a few years ago. And it's not his fault that elevated expectations of him to an unrealistic level early in his career. He's still coming off a 47-point season where he had nearly 20 goals, and people act like Dylan Cousins sucked last year. Was he great? No. But as a 22-year-old, you'd say that's a pretty damn okay season. But it's the quandary of Sabres fans. We have no patience because the team has missed the playoffs for 13 years. But then again, when you have no patience, you run guys out of town that have talent. We've
never seen that before.
Casey Middlestad didn't do anything in his career until he was 24 years old. And then we complain when we're trading our leading scorer when he's 25. And Dylan Cousins has done 5 million times more than Casey Middlestad at this point, at the similar age, to his point of the career that he's had. And yet we like to just crap on him. And then I am concerned about Jack Quinn. Like, I'll be real. Like, Jack Quinn has been really, really bad. And there were concerns when Jack Quinn was drafted that maybe he capitalized off of being a little bit of a late bloomer. And I understood some of those concerns, but every time he's been at a level, he's had that leap. His final year in juniors, massive leap. Goes to the American Hockey League, slow start, massive leap. The next year where he had 27 goals and 61 points, I believe, in 45 games. And then year 1 in Buffalo, he looked solid. Not unbelievable, but he looked solid. And year 2, you saw some improvement. And I think we were all hoping that we'd see that Jack Quinn leak this year, given that we all assume he's healthy and back. But maybe the injuries impacted him. Maybe the confidence is gone for whatever reason. And it's to the point where we're getting close to, can you put him on the ice on a nightly basis? And if the Sabres had a reasonable person that they could call up and expect an upgrade, I think you would see Quinn start being a healthy scratch. I know some people said maybe trade him. Is it too early to trade him? I don't know. It's one of those things where when you hear Kevin Adams being in the trade market and possibly wanting to upgrade the team, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm like, well, if somebody's willing to take Jack Quinn in a package deal, maybe that's what you have to do. You have to give up one of your prospects to make something happen. But then I ask myself, what value does Quinn even have right now? If we want him gone, who's going to want him? And
Exactly.
it's really tough because I think he would still have some value in this league as a former top 10, 11 pick in the draft and the potential, his age, and all this other stuff. But at the same point, he hasn't done much on the ice. And you watch guys like Benson.
Mm-hmm.
Benson's already clearly ahead of where Jack Quinn is. Cousins is clearly ahead. How much longer until a guy like Kulik surpasses him? Or
we might be there right now, Bunty. Like,
I mean, Roseanne in Rochester. It's to the point where you really got to wonder where Jack Quinn is going to fit on this team if this 18-game struggle continues to mid-season and possibly beyond that, because he needs to find it at some point, or you might need to risk ending the Jack Quinn experiment earlier than what you thought.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing too we haven't really discussed in the whole Jack Quinn saga is the whole contract extension, where I think a lot of us were even last year like kind of concerned, like how are the Sabres going to afford this massive Quinn contract, because we expect him to at the least stay where he ended last season, where the last like 9-10 games of the year he was alongside Dylan Cousins and Zach Benson, and those three all of them found success together. And so I think we all kind of assumed when they would get back here that would kind of resume it. And it has. Like Cousins' game is elevated. Zach Benson's just a dog. That guy he's 19. It's crazy the progression he's made and how young he is. And he does not get the flowers he deserves for how young he is and the impact he's making on the Sabres team already. But yeah, Jack Quinn, it's like, at what point do you pull that plug? Because I give the Sabres props. Like, they're trying to make it work. Like, I know people want him scratched in the press box. That's not going to help Jack Quinn at all. For a guy that's really struggling to find the back of the net and like gripping a stick too hard, he knows he's not playing great right now. Like, he can understand that. And the fact that the Sabres keep giving him these opportunities to find his game, I think speaks a lot that they believe in him. And it really sucks that hasn't seen any progression on the ice, though.
And I agree with Steve Noble's comment that you had up earlier, and I'll put it up again. It makes no sense.
None.
He was good at the end of last year, and just going through his stats, his first 3 years in Buffalo, 37 points as a rookie, as a 21-year-old, 14 goals. Like, that's not a bad start to your NHL career. Last year, 19 points in 27 games, 9 goals. Like, I think there was reasons to be excited about Jack Quinn heading into this year. And you and I both thought he'd be one of the top goal scorers on this team.
Yes.
To have 1 goal in 17 games, it's astonishing, honestly. I honestly am completely shocked at how poor he's looked out there. And not just from a lack of point production. We've seen that from Cousins before, where maybe he goes through a slump and he doesn't put up a lot of goals and assists, but he has chances. I'm not even seeing the chances from Quinn. I can't even see him enter the zone properly with the puck. The most basic things on the ice, he's struggling with right now. I believe he's a team worst -6. And I know all the Twitter people, plus minus doesn't really matter. Like, that's the new thing. We just act like plus minus doesn't matter because it's a team stat, even though all these individual metrics are impacted by your line mates, situations, who you're playing with. Are you on a good team, bad team? Like, but we'll just signal out plus minus is the only stat that doesn't matter. Like, yes, not the most significant, but still has some meaning to it.
Yes.
But whatever. I've only watched hockey since I was 6 years old and the past 27 years. So what do I know? But Jack Quinn, I really do hope he figures it out, because he's only 23. And I really do believe Kevin Adams' plan banks a lot on Quinn, Cousins figuring it out. And if it doesn't, at some point, you got to start thinking like, okay, our first line is good, really good. Our third line with these veterans that we basically have just traded for is solid. We got a fourth line that at least they play hard and they make life difficult. And the second line, which is supposed to be all these top 10 picks, is what's holding us back. Well, then maybe it is just my impatience if I'm Kevin Adams that is holding back the team, because if everything else is looking at least halfway adequate, but my homegrown talent isn't getting there, well, then I have to question, have I been too patient? And the part that he probably struggles with and has that internal conflict with is that he's seen a guy like Casey Middlestat make it work after turning 24 years old. He's seen Sam Reinhart go from being a good / really good player in Buffalo to becoming an absolute superstar in Colorado. He has seen Tage Thompson take forever to figure it out, but then turn into one of the best goal scorers in the league. And in the back of his mind, he's probably wondering, it has to happen eventually, right? And the question is, like, do you continue to be patient, or do you make a move? And if you make that move and he goes off somewhere else, it's just another person on the list of players that have gone elsewhere and killed it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing that's really keeping the Sabres tied into Jack Quinn, and the reason I think we're all still pulling for it, it's not because he was just some high prospect who's yet to find success in the NHL at all. Like, we've seen that he can do it here, and he has that in his game. He's got that club in the bag. But again, for whatever reason, this season, he's taken that step back and just been unable to even show us like flashes of the Jack Quinn we've seen in the past. Like, at least with like Cousins or guys that we've seen struggle, we can lead, or like even when Tage was hurt, like we would see flashes of, Tommy Dangle showing back up in a night or whatever the case was. But with Quinn this year, it just hasn't been there. And we have another young guy on this roster that, we've seen good flashes before. And this season, like, it's just not to the level I think we're hoping and expecting for. And Bunty, I know Halloween was just, a month ago, basically. But I got something that might scare you a little bit right now. And it's Devin Levi's stats right here. His last 5. It is a scary, scary, scary sight where we're not seeing anything of note here. And I know I talked about it a lot last night on, my Win More Lots More, presented by the great people at Batavia Downs Gaming and Hotel, that Devin Levi, he's just been super, super over aggressive in the way he plays. And that's hurting this team. Like, he's a freak athletically. We can all agree he is an absurdly athletic goalie who makes these crazy saves, but he's not making the saves that the Sabres need. And when you have a young team that's around 500 trying to get over that hump, like, you need the most security in net that you can. And I think, Bunty, we can agree too, like with UPL, like with young goalies, progress isn't linear. Like, it's not going to be each year these guys are going to, take a step and you're going to see that progression. Like, especially with goaltending, you're going to have ebbs and flows. And right now we're at kind of at I would say a lower point with Levi, but there's a lot of fundamentals he needs to work on, just slowing his game down, keeping him more controlled. And I think that's what the big reason we've seen his save percentage not get above his highest is an 8.89 in his last 5 starts. Like, that is something you can't happen.
Yeah, Devin Levi is really struggling to start this year, and it's tough. He needs more opportunities to be out there to work on his game, but he hasn't had the play to warrant getting those opportunities. So another quandary for the Sabres, where the thing he needs the most is the thing that you really can't risk because it'll hurt the teams too much on the ice. So the only real answer the Sabres have right now that Reimer is back in the fold is you have to send him to Rochester and just let him focus exclusively on his development. I think they went into the season hoping that you're going to be able to have like a 55-45 split with UPL and Levi, especially after they saw how Levi finished last year in Rochester, where he was absolutely dominating down there. And this is the tough part with a guy like Devin Levi. He had the great finish 2 years ago when he first signed from Northeastern. They wanted him to have a chance to earn the starting job because they think that he truly is this guy with special talent. And I think he is too. He is a very talented young goalie, and he's done things at the college level that we have never seen before. But he also wasn't ready for the NHL level. So we saw that right away. They sent him down to Rochester. They think that they have him fixed. And during that time, magically, we found out that UPL is actually pretty damn good. Turns out the guy that another player that Sabres fans had given up on when he was 22, 23 years old, turns out when he's 24, 25, he's actually pretty good. Oh my God.
Crazy.
It's almost like if you're patient with some of these guys, they turn out to be good hockey players. But what do I know? I'm not a pessimistic person that just hates on the team constantly. But what happened with Levi is they wanted to give him a chance again this year after how he ended the year in Rochester, but they brought in Reimer for insurance. After camp, Levi did a good job. They decided, okay, we're going to put Reimer in Rochester. We're going to waive him. He has $1 million deal. Hopefully he'll fall through waivers. Nobody will claim him because of the contract, and it will be okay. Anaheim ruins that plan by claiming him, and then you're basically committed to Levi. And unfortunately for the Sabres, early on, Levi just didn't show up. But then you're put in the spot. You can't put him to Rochester because you have nobody in Rochester that's worthy of being called up, and Reimer is gone. Now, thankfully for the Sabres, Reimer put back on waivers. They claim him, and now you're in the situation where after a few games, you clearly know now that Levi isn't going to get the job done. So now I'm at the mode. You make Reimer the full-time backup, and Levi, you have the year down in Rochester.
Yeah, no need to rush it.
Work on every part of your game, dominate, and do what you need to do to develop. Because NHL players have you figured out right now. You're too sporadic in the crease. You're not making timely saves. And yes, you can see all the talent, the athleticism, the ability to make the spectacular happen. But making the spectacular isn't what makes you a good goalie in the NHL level. Consistency is. And what you need at the NHL level is someone that you can rely on at all times to do his job, and then once in a while come up with a big save. And we've seen Levi come up with a big save every once in a while, but it's not nearly enough, and the consistency is bad. You need to be around a 90 save percentage in the NHL level, not 86, not 87. And it is a little concerning that a guy like Eric Comrie leaves the Sabres, goes back to Winnipeg, and then suddenly he looks great again. So maybe something is about the players in front of him and how they play. That definitely plays a role. But for this point in time, you gotta just let Levi go down and develop. And it's not the end of the world that he's not a full-time NHL goalie. He's 22, 23 years old. Guys like Ryan Miller weren't even in Buffalo till they were 25. UPL didn't figure it out until he was 24. So I'm not extremely worried, but what it ultimately comes down to is this team is expected to compete for a playoff spot. This is a drought that's gotten way too long. And if you keep Levi as your backup goalie, you're drastically reducing your opportunity of actually competing for a spot.
100%. And kind of going back to the progress in linear too, this is Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen's stats from his first 5 years here in Buffalo. We saw initial success. We see a step back. And then with time, we sent him to the East Coast, for Pete's sake, Bunty. It's not a demotion or a thing that the Sabres are giving up on Devin Levi for sending him to Rochester. They're sending him to Rochester because they believe in his future and they believe in him as a goalie. If they didn't, they would just send him out to Slaughter, send him to Anaheim, send him somewhere else. But getting him to Rochester is a good place for him where he can get the games in. And goaltending is such a mental position. You even see in Pittsburgh right now with Tristan Jarry, a guy who was shown a ton of success in the league. Right now, the fan base in Pittsburgh is beyond upset with Jarry, and I'm obviously not him. I can't tell you how that affects on the ice, but you feel like it has to be somewhere where those lights are so bright where he comes back from a conditioning stint in the AHL. They can't even play him on home ice because the fans are that against him, and we don't want to see that happen to Levi. Fans love him. We give him to Rochester, give him games so he can continue to build that confidence up. And speaking of guys trying to build confidence up,
can we say one quick thing though?
Go for it. Go for it.
The Sabres did get lucky with UPL because even though we know development takes time and that sometimes it is 24, 25, 26 before you really figure it out, they did kind of give up on UPL regardless of what they say. I know the Beyond the Blue and Golds, Kevin is talking to UPL we still believe in you. Don't just because we signed Eric Comrie and we have Devin Levi in the fold and we also have Portillo and like at the time when they had all these other goals, he's like, we still believe in your future in Buffalo. It's like, no, you didn't. You had two other goalies in mind above him. It's just that Comrie turned out to be awful in Buffalo, and then Levi didn't end up developing as quickly as they wanted him to. So UPL last year, when he went on that stretch, that was the first time the Sabres were ever like, oh, I actually think maybe you could be our starting goalie going forward. And then luckily, because we finally got that development, we're in the situation right now where we feel good about UPL. But what did we also learn in that situation? All the analytics and metrics now say like a near 50-50 split is probably the way to go. But what we've seen is that UPL benefits from being a bell cow, while Levi is hurt in that situation. And you might have to have the question going forward with these two goalies of if they will even be compatible with each other and complementary of each other. Because if you have a backup that needs time and you have a starter that needs to own the crease, that might not work out. You might need to talk about it in the future, but that's still a question at least a couple years down the line.
Exactly. And even last year, Bunty, like the Sabres gave the keys to the crease to Devin Levi, and UPL he saw his first game last year at the end of October. Like that is such a crazy thing to think about, even just sitting last year from the great year he had, that the Sabres fully went all in on Levi for last year. And, here we are now where we've learned that UPL does so well when he has that crease, he has the games, and that's not a problem. I mean, even like we look at NFL, look at that. Like they have the saying, if you have two quarterbacks, you have none. We could have a similar thing here where you have two goalies, you almost have none, because what they both need hurts each other in that long run. But I guess that's an issue maybe next year when, Levi comes back up after hopefully a great stint in Rochester. They lift the Calder, they do all this stuff. But for now, I think he just needs those games down in and
that's another thing that analytics will never be able to get you the picture on a player, because right now the stats will be like, well, Levi sucks. Well, it's like, well, Levi needs ice time. Yeah. So you look at things in small samples or not the full picture, and it's going to tell you something that's not true. Just like everybody thinks Eric Comrie sucks. Eric Comrie is not a horrible goaltender.
No.
But in Buffalo, it was never going to work out. You put him back in another good situation, suddenly he looks like a decent goaltender again. It's amazing how things are situational in this sport. And if you don't know how to interpret data properly, you can come to all these incorrect conclusions. And that's the one thing that I find really funny about analytics in this current day and age, is that everybody's always like, well, do you listen to the analytics? Do you follow the analytics? Do you follow the graphs? It's not about following the graphs. It's not about listening to the graphs. It's about knowing how to interpret data. And you know what? Half of Americans don't even know how to do basic math. How am I going to trust them to know how to interpret advanced math? Like, there's only a few of us that actually know how to do that. And I'm not going to trust the basic person that struggled with ninth grade algebra and geometry and basic shit.
Exactly. And if it was that easy, Bunty, where you could just look at the numbers and be like, oh, this guy's good, this guy's not, everyone would be doing it, and we'd be out of business because we'd have nothing to talk about. But sports, and especially hockey, is so much more than just numbers on a screen. I know the importance of analytics, and there's space for that, but there's a give and take where there's only so much numbers can tell you, where you do need some sort of.
And I'm a numbers guy. I love the numbers. I need to use the numbers, but you got to be able to use your eyes. And it's like Henry Jokiharju. When he's with Dahlin, his splits are amazing. But then you look at the splits without Dahlin, they're awful. But if you're just looking, if he plays 90% of the time with Dahlin, then you're going to think he's always awesome. It's like you got to not just see one number. You have to see the full picture. And that's very difficult, especially when I'm not calling anybody else out on this, but you only have a limited amount of analytics people covering a team like the Sabres. And they're going to have their own perspectives and biases as well. So you're seeing their views on things with the data that they share as well. You're not always seeing independent views. Sometimes the best way to see the information is to see it from people that have no affiliation with the team that you're covering.
Exactly. And speaking of like seeing the bigger picture, Bunty, I think there's been a couple guys on the Sabres team who have heard it all from fans the past couple years. And I think I want to say this guy's become an unsung hero this year just because we don't have been talking about him. And I thought, stepped in really well after being forgotten about by fans, didn't want any part of him being in the lineup ever again. Jacob Bryson is a guy who has stepped in when Yoki Haru and Samuelson were out of the lineup. And Bryson's been a guy where we haven't talked about him, which has been a great thing for Jacob Bryson, because I feel like anytime he is on the spectrum of Sabres Twitter, it's because fans have pitchforks and want to, burn the house down. But I thought he's been a guy who has seen minimal ice time in years prior, where when he is in, the spotlight's on him. And now he stepped in and is playing good hockey on the team's bottom six right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's been serviceable. I don't think he's...
Yeah, I mean, it's not great, but it's not horrible. And I think...
Obviously not great, but you know what? A lot of people gave up on this guy a few years ago and thought he was awful. And I mean, I can understand why. He was a minus 24 2 years ago and in 59 games. So that was pretty bad. Again, my plus minus is not the best stat to be using, but if you're a minus 24, that is concerning. I will tell you that. And yeah, I mean, on the ice, he looks like he looks serviceable. You can at least put him in as a bottom pair defenseman, and you could do worse than him on several nights. And it's not a guy I have a ton of opinions on, but I will say overall that I think a lot of these guys have looked better under Lindy, just in general. And I know some of the graphs probably won't confirm that. Then, not everybody, not everybody on the ice, but I think Bryson has had some good moments. Hopefully, he can keep it up. With Samuelson out of the lineup week to week, they're going to need him to play some good hockey. Yoki Haru, it looks like he might be a little bit in the doghouse right now. So it's a situation where really defensively on the Sabres, I can tell you the top three guys, and then after that, there's some questions, but there's a clear divide between who I think Lindy is really high on versus everybody else who kind of just blends into this team.
Yeah, one guy that's been a fan favorite of, it seems, Lindy, but even just in general, who was kind of in question going into the year, where he came around the team, very well. We see success that Casey Middleset has elsewhere, and there's always going to be that comparison. But Bowen Byram, I think the past couple weeks has really taken on a bigger role with the Sabres team, where a couple games ago he led the team in ice minutes with 32 minutes or something like that, where he's been a guy that has slowly been chipping away and carving himself out a bigger role on the Sabre squad, where, he's running power plays, he's killing penalties, he's taking on really big minutes and kind of lessening the load on Rasmus Dahlin's shoulders. And I know, Bunty, you've had a little escapade on Twitter talking about, even just the Middlestat Byram discourse, where I don't know, I'll give you the floor to kind of talk about Byram, because he's been a guy that I think you have a lot to say on.
Yeah, I think Bowen Byram is a really solid hockey player with high upside that just has not received any benefit of the doubt early in the Sabres career due to a fan base that is just full of hate over Casey Middlestat getting traded to the Colorado Avalanche. And none of it, very little of it, is due to Byram's play on the ice. I know that his metrics aren't the best and that he's had some solid games, a lot of poor games, and that a lot of people thought it was redundant trading for another offensive-minded defenseman. But the fact of it was this. When they made that trade, prior to that trade, everyone that was a Sabres fan said, we need to add to our top four defense. We need a top four defenseman. And what have we learned since in the offseason? We have learned that free agent defensemen don't want to come to Buffalo that are any good. So you got to pay big money for them. And you've already paid big money to Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin. So good luck spending another overpayment on a premier free agent who, one, would have to want to come to a losing organization, two, go to a place where he's going to pay more taxes, and three, go to one of the smaller markets in the NHL. Then Your other option is trade for one, but a lot of the more like experienced defensemen have no trade clauses. So that probably ain't going to work considering most of those people are going to have Buffalo on their no trade list. So what do? You have to trade for a younger guy that doesn't have a no trade clause, that you believe has upside, and you try to maximize what you can get out of them. Well, that's what Bowen Byram is. Former top 5 pick, won a Stanley Cup with the Colorado Avalanche, has shown offensive upside, looking for more of an opportunity because he was down on the third pair in Colorado.
Yep.
And then because he isn't instantly looking like a premier defenseman in a new city, new system, new group of guys, we're like, damn, what is wrong with this guy? Like, why is he not looking good? We traded our leading scorer. And the leading scorer stuff with Casey Middlestat was so funny too, because it's like Tage Thompson wasn't playing healthy last year. Cousins had a bad season. Tuck had a bad season. Dahlin wasn't producing the points. It's like, do we really think that Casey Middlestat on most years would be the leading scorer on the Buffalo Sabres? No, he's like their 5th or 6th guy in a normal season. He was their number 3 center. And it's like Casey Middlestat has his first good productive season of his career in terms of like well-rounded on both sides of the ice. And then we trade him because the Sabres had already committed money to the number 1 center, number 2 center, and they didn't want to commit another $6 million to a number 3 center. And people just lost their shit. And it's just, I don't think Byram has had a fair chance since he's come to Buffalo. And is there things he can improve on?
Everyone
Absolutely. There's things he can improve on. But last year, in his first 18 games in Buffalo, he had 9 points. It was a -1. Is that great? No, it's average. But over a season, that's a 40-point pace. Pretty damn good. Then this year, 18 games, 11 points, and a +7. He's on pace for 50 points. Middlestat in his 2 years in Buffalo was in the upper 50s. So I use plus minus because it's Twitter. And you have 280 characters, and you don't have a million spaces to really go in depth on the differences between the trade. But when Casey Middlestat was putting all these points up in the beginning of the year, I just saw nonstop highlights from Sabres fans of Casey Middlestat. Every single time he scored a goal, oh my God, Casey Middlestat, another Sam Reinhart. He's going to tear it up. He's going to have 80 points this year. And every time Byram makes a mistake, people, oh, Byram, what a bum. This guy sucks. Casey Middlestat is a -13. Like, I don't care. Plus minus is an overrated stat. He is the worst plus minus on Colorado. That is not good. And the funny thing, and then Byram is a +7. I don't care. Plus minus is overrated. That is pretty good on a team that allows just as many goals as they score.
Yeah.
And on top of it, this is the other thing about it too. It's Bowen Byram is 23. I'm expecting him to get better. Like his upside is higher than this. So you might have bought like with a good price, a fair price, but you got a guy that has the potential to be a really good defenseman. And if you have 3 offensive defensemen, you're going to have the ability to score a lot of goals in the future. You got 2 guys that are locked up for the next 6, 7, 8 years in Power and Dahlin. And if you can have Byram as another guy in that mix, you guys are going to be – the Sabres are going to be scoring a lot of goals. And that's only going to help the forward group going forward. And at the same
– I think there's an talked about point of this equation too, where if the Sabres don't make that move, we don't have Ryan McLeod.
Yes. Yes. Like, it's like they made the Middlestat. Like, this is so conveniently ignored by Sabres Twitter that it just boggles my mind. And I said it at the point too. And I don't want to pretend to be Nostradamus, but I just think that the big part about sports fans is they lack foresight too often. The Sabres don't trade Casey Middlestat because they're like, oh, we just want to trade Casey Middlestat and we're going to be okay with Peyton Krebs being our third-line center going forward. They trade Casey Middlestat because they saw an opportunity to fill another hole on their team, and they already knew that they were probably going to upgrade that third center spot with someone else at a point in time, whether it be free agency or via trade. And now you got Ryan McLeod. So if you were asking me back then, would you rather have Ryan McLeod and Bowen Byram on your team or just Casey Middleton? That's a home run. Like I'm telling you, easy. You got me a two-way third line center that's going to help me on both sides of the ice, and I'm adding a puck-moving defenseman. Hell yeah, I'd do that trade. And the two players I give up in return are Casey Middleton and Matt Savoy. Like, I'm perfectly fine with that. And it's kind of funny to me how we get told that plus minus is a redundant stat, but then sometimes goals and assists being on a team with all these superstars are not redundant. Like, it's like if you put Casey Middleton back in Buffalo, is he a point per game player? No, because he's not playing with those guys. And like I understand that in recent weeks he's been playing with third and fourth liners and AHL players. And my point was never to hate on Casey Middleton. I'm a big fan of Casey Middleton. I think he's a good player. I think he could be a 60 to 70 point producer in the NHL. But the fact is, he has clear deficiencies in his own zone. He is poor defensively. The Sabres want to be an up-tempo, up and down the ice guy. He's more of a horizontal left-right guy. And it took him a long time to develop. And then the last thing I'll say is we keep talking about how Yoki Haru can't elevate when he plays with other players, and he's dependent on the guys he's with. Well, then why in Colorado, when Casey Middlestat is playing with lesser players, we're not talking about why he sucks with these lesser players? Isn't he supposed to be elevating them? Or is Casey Middlestat dependent on putting points up when he's on a power play with some of the most skilled players in the NHL? You put me on the power play with the most skilled players in the NHL, I'm going to get some points by default, because you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pass it to McKinnon. I'm going to pass it to the various different guys, McCarr, and they're going to score goals, and I'm going to get free assists. His advanced metrics ranking amongst the top 9 forwards in Colorado are near the bottom of those forwards. So even though his points are great, some of his metrics are not. And then if you compare, I think, his expected goals for percentage and put it on Buffalo, it'd be something like 8th on the Sabres. Oh, so it's not even good compared to the Sabres players. Like, so what it really comes down to is the metrics community has told us that certain stats don't matter. So when I bring up a stat that doesn't matter to the metrics community, a bunch of people will tell me that my point is invalid because I'm using something that's stupid. But then, because I didn't want to spend 5 tweets on a thread pointing out the other things that are very average about his game, the people will say, oh, you're wrong. This is what he's doing. You know what? I could go on and on. There's other things I can point to. And yes, I can point to Byram struggling too. But we're also comparing a defenseman to a forward. I don't know how many people told me, well, Byram has 11 points and Middleton has 16. Wow.
That's crazy to put that argument in.
That's almost like making my point. Yeah, the defenseman that is 3 years younger and getting paid less money is almost putting up the same amount of points as the forward.
Yeah, 11 points in 18 games. Like, if he was a third-line center, I would be ecstatic with those numbers. But he's basically a mid-pairing defenseman where he's not playing with Dahlin. Like, he's a young defenseman too. He's got 11 points in 18 games. Is crazy. The fact that, yeah, if he was the third line center and the Sabres just basically a swap for Middlestat and a third line center, yeah, it wouldn't be great. But the fact he's a defenseman who's not on the top power play unit, because that's Rasmus Dahlin, he's a guy that is moving pace of play when he's out there. And I mean, even look at this whole Sabres team. Like, we have 3 young defensemen who already have over 11 points in 18 games. I mean, Dahlin's at 16, Power's at 13. Those are things that not every team can say, where, yeah, you have defensemen to put up points, but to do it at that age where the oldest one, Dahlin's only 24, like you have 24, 23, and 22, I think, for the 3 of them. That is something, Bunty, I might get slaughtered for this. Can I say the age? Can we be happy? Can we have some sort of positivity there?
We should be. We have 3 young defensemen that can get points, that can produce. Like, we got 3 offensively talented defensemen, and we're like, oh my God. You know what the funny thing is? We want to run some of them out of town. Every time Darlene makes a mistake, people hammer him on Twitter. Every time Power has a dumb mistake, people are like, this guy's a bum, he's soft. It's like, you know why you don't have good things, Buffalo? Because you run people out of town. And yes, ultimately it's the organization that makes the choices and that trades these players. Do we think these players want to play in this city when we just shit on them all the time? See, like, that's the really tough part. I understand the frustrations of the fan base. I am frustrated with the lack of team success. But let's be real. What team in the NHL wouldn't want Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, and even Bowen Byram has been getting calls because teams are trying to see if the Sabres will be desperate enough to make a dumb move and get rid of him. It's the fact of it is there's several players on the Sabres team right now that I could point out that a lot of teams in the NHL would want. I'll go through them right now. Players that NHL teams would take in a heartbeat. Tuck, Thompson, Peterka. Teams would take Cousins in a second. They'd bank on his youth experience. Benson, McLeod, Zucker, Greenway, Darlene, Power, Byram. Like, it's like there was previous Sabres teams where, like, there was a lot of bad players and that, like, weren't desirable by other teams. But, like, there is a good 2 handfuls of Sabres players that other NHL teams would instantly take, and they would make them look good. Because the thing about a guy like Darlene, you put him on a winning team, that guy's a superstar. Like, he would instantly be like a 70, 80 plus point player. You put Owen Power on like a right team where like he has a good defensive partner. Like, that guy could be an all-star. And it's like, I get the frustration. Like, we want these guys to be great. We want them to be amazing. And we're frustrated at the failures of the team. But we have to understand it's a team game. And sometimes we focus so much on hating these individuals that we just run them out of time. It's not a coincidence to me that all these players leave Buffalo and a lot of them see the greatest version of themselves after they leave. It's part of it is we are bad culture in Buffalo, and that we haven't been, this is weird saying this, but it's true. The organization hasn't been patient enough with developing the team. It sounds weird when you say that because it's a 13-year playoff drought and we're asking fans to be patient with them. But the problem is the reason they have been unsuccessful is because they're constantly changing things on a biannual basis. So what they really need is they need these guys to continue growing, but we don't have the patience to let them do it because of the failures of the organization. When in reality, if you got rid of some of these guys, they'd probably be great players in other situations.
Yeah, I mean, Bunty, that you actually led to what I was going to say perfectly, where I think we as Buffalo Sabres fans have, I'm going to use the word spoiled in the sense of throughout history of going back to the 90s, where you have these teams that are, average, and then they get really good by bringing in players who are already at their potential. And I think the current system the Sabres are in, even like early on in the drought and in the rebuild, so much hope is brought in bringing in 18-year-old Jack Eichel who produces right away. Like, that is so out of the ordinary in the NHL in today's world, where you can have just a young kid come in and change an organization off the get-go and be a guy. It also helps when the team sucks. But right now, the NHL has changed where you're having a lot more younger guys come in and trying to figure things out basically on the fly. And it's not the NFL where you draft a kid and you see him play the next year and make big progressions. The NHL is a league where it takes time to have guys find their game, or they're going to spend time playing in leagues you've never heard of to hopefully get to North America and not be the player you thought they were going to be right away. Like, it takes time. Like, these kids will need the time to develop.
It's a broke system right now. Let's be real. For years, we talked about how the NHL had parity and you could go from last to making the playoffs and you could bounce up. Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo, Montreal, Philly, like, how bad have those teams been? And they've been bad for a long time. If anything, what we're seeing in recent years in the NHL is it's hard to make that leap from being bad to being good. And there's a reason why we've seen it across the Sabres division, because let's be real, just looking at the teams that they're fighting with right now, Ottawa, Detroit, like Detroit did the opposite of Buffalo. They went out and they tried to get all these free agents last year, and it almost worked out. But you know what? Their season ended the same way the Sabres season did 2 years ago, point short of the playoffs. So it's a it's a tough dilemma. And I get the frustration of fans. Everybody just wants them to be good. They want them to make the playoffs. And this is a team that historically, prior to this drought, made the playoffs 75% of the time, plus 75% of the time. And their longest playoff drought before this current one was 3 years. It was 3 years. So now we're at 4 times that. And it's just really tough because we're not a desirable market where free agents are going to give us the benefit of the doubt because they want to live in Buffalo. And some of these are repeatable things that we've talked about on previous episodes. But when you factor in small market, losing organization, cold weather, high taxes, and a place with very little history in terms of Stanley Cups, we don't. And then you add in the fact that passionate fan base going through historic drought equals toxic fan base. Yep. Players don't want to be a part of that. If you're going to be part of a losing culture, they'd rather play in the South or like the Florida Panthers for all those years, where they can make their millions of dollars, go to work, and at the end of the day, they can go to the beach and blend in because nobody even knows who they are. I bet you Sam Reinhart walks around Fort Lauderdale, that maybe 2 in 10 people might know who he is.
Yep.
Maybe not even. Like Sam Reinhart is just another white guy walking in Florida. Like I hate to say it, but like the dude is one of the top goal scorers in NHL. And most people down there, if he goes to Miami, if he goes to South Beach, they probably don't even know who he is. He doesn't stand out. He's just another dude. And but to a lot of players, that's what they want.
Yeah.
And when you go to a place like Buffalo, where everybody knows who you are, and your team sucks, they see it on social media. They hear it from people, and you factor in everything, and it's just not a desirable situation. So I think the Sabres have felt that they've had to go through this youth movement, and the hope is you bring in enough of these prospects that some of them are going to pan out, and then you surround them with these guys like McLeod and Greenway and Zucker, and that they'll be able to elevate them enough and show them and lead by example to get the best out of it. Because, like, I think, honestly, that's the approach that you kind of need to have. You need to have some of your homegrown talent or young, exciting prospects turn into stars. Like, you got that with Thompson. You got UPL emerging. You have Dahlin. You have Power. Like, so you got guys. I know Thompson wasn't drafted by the Sabres, but you got enough of that homegrown, home-developed guys that you've turned into special talent. Then the next step is you need to continue drafting guys. So Cousins is a little bit older, but I'll still put Quinn and Peterka and Benson and Kulik in that category. Where you really need to bank on is the veterans that you bring in, the Zuckers, the McLeods, the Greenways. They need to be the guys that can show the young kids what they need to do to elevate their game. But yet at the same time, the Zuckers, the McLeods, they got to lead by example. They got to do some of the gritty stuff. They got to be doing some of the tough stuff to show those young skill guys that winning in the NHL level is more than just making a pretty pass or making a nice finish. It's going into the corner and finishing your check. It's going on the forecheck. It's getting a puck in front of the net, doing the dirty work, doing the stuff that Zach Benson does.
Yes.
And they get screwed over by the officials because NHL refs suck. And that's the stuff that this team, I think Lindy is trying to ingrain in them. He's trying to teach them, you're good, you're talented, but that doesn't just – doing just that is not enough. Let's take those next steps to become a winning brand of hockey. And it doesn't happen overnight.
No.
But I will say, I have seen steps. I have seen small steps in an evolution of this team. And I do think they are closer to where they need to be than what they were at the beginning of this year. And the last thing I'll say about this, I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of comments saying this is the same Sabres team as last year, or that that they look no different than last year. And I've seen some accounts that post about the Sabres making comments like that. Ignorant.
Yes.
Just ignorant, stupid, and anyone that says stuff like that, you don't watch hockey. You don't watch hockey. Like I don't even need metrics to say that. And I see way too much of that still by Sabres Twitter.
Yeah, and I think, Bunty, basically like everything you said, like what cures all ailments, especially in Western New York, is winning. We've seen that with the Bills where, now it is a premier destination where free agents want to go, where players want to go to. And the same thing is going to happen with the Sabres when wins start to happen. We see this team wins 3 games in a row and the city comes alive. Like even from our perspective, like our numbers, our engagement goes up dramatically when the Sabres win a couple games. Like that's what it's going to take for this team to get to that next step. Because winning cures all ailments. And just like winning at Batavia Downs Gaming Hotel is another big way to make our lives better. But before we wrap things up, the Sabres are going to head out west. We're going to have a game at 10:30 at night on a Wednesday and have to get up for work on Thursday. This is a big West Coast trip where they're playing some teams they should beat. How are we feeling going into this trip? You have LA on Wednesday. You play Anaheim. You got a couple other games, San Jose in there too, I believe. Like, how are we feeling with this trip out to California, Bunty?
I mean, you're playing 3 teams that you should be able to have at least a chance of winning. But the question is, how are they going to look out west? It's a long trip. Sometimes you have it, sometimes you don't. On paper, you're better than San Jose. You're better than Anaheim. And you already gave the Kings a tough battle in your home opener this year. Ideally, I want them to win 2 out of 3. Get me back to 500, coming back to Buffalo at 10-10-1, and I'll be okay with that. If this was home games, I would hope for a sweep, but realistically, we know the Sabres aren't good enough to expect sweeps or expect them to win any given night. It's one of those things where hopefully they bring their game. Philadelphia isn't a very good team, and we saw what the Flyers did against the Sabres just last night. So you can't take anything for granted, but if the Sabres want to make the playoffs, the one thing that they'll have to do this year is they need to do a better job against the teams they're expected to compete against. Losing to Montreal on Monday last week, unacceptable. 7-5, even worse. That was a team that was 0-5-1 their last 6, had scored only 12 goals in that span, and then you let them score 7, and you blow twice you blow a 1-goal lead in the second and third periods to lose to a horrible team. You got points back in St. Louis by battling through adversity, and then you lay another egg on the road in Philadelphia. This team needs to find a way to somehow battle on a nightly basis. And I do want to respond to this. Otis, I understand what you're saying, but the NHL recognizes it as 500. Points percentage is what they go by when they determine 500. Overtime losses are not the same as a loss. You're playing 3-on-3, and then you're playing in a shootout, and you get a point for it. If you end the year 1-1-80, you're not 1-81. At the end of the year, you'll still have 82 points, and you have a point percentage of 500. So I understand the comment, but I respectfully disagree with what you're saying there. And then Noble with the point, the little things matter. Completely agree with that. They need to do the little things much better. But I'll wrap it up by saying this. This team needs to find a way to get more consistent on a nightly basis. I think they've gotten better overall this season. Last year, when they'd be inconsistent, there'd just be games where like they'd go stretches of 5 games where like they wouldn't even generate scoring chances, and it was just horrendous. It'd be like 3-1, 2-1, like 4-2. This team right now is like a top 10 scoring team in the league. Like the Sabres are generating goals, and I know the opportunities aren't perfect, but this team is putting pucks in the net. They just need to find a way to be able to do it when another team is going at them with that same mentality, and it's tough. I don't think the Sabres. A lot of times you'll hear after a game, Dylan Cousins in the locker room, and it'll be like, we just have to find a way to match the intensity, or we have to put that effort in every week, every game. I don't think it's that the Sabres don't put effort in. I think a lot of times that's just what players say to try to explain something to a reporter when they really don't have a proper answer. But they do put the effort in. What they have to do is get that emotional and the growth as a player, physically, emotionally, to where it's just instinct for them to make the plays. A lot of hockey is just instinct, being in the right spot, making the right play, not overthinking in your head. And I think sometimes this team still looks like a team that's trying to learn, where should I be? What should I be doing? And the moment things become second nature to them and they instinctively do what Lindy wants them to do, that's when the consistency will be there. But until that happens, you're going to see jumps game to game, because what happens is they'll find success on attacking teams in a certain style. And then teams will look at the film, see what they're doing, they adjust to it. Then the Sabres go into a game thinking, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. It doesn't work, and they don't know how to respond to it. And these are the intricacies that happen during hockey that a lot of fans don't understand, and they'll just be like, they're not trying. Like, why do they keep doing it over and over again? There's a lot more involved that just is completely ignored. And because we don't watch hockey the same way that players and coaches and more advanced hockey minds do. And what the Sabres ultimately have to do is they have to find a way to be able to play different brands of hockey depending on the opponent, and being able to adjust better to when certain things aren't working for them on a given night.
Exactly. Like, I agree wholeheartedly with that statement. Like, I think it's something I know I talked about online earlier in the year, like doing like my post-game breakdowns, that the Sabres looked so lost defensively in a lot of their system stuff. And a lot of that was due to, you have a lot of young guys who've played for about 1 million head coaches right now in the NHL in their short career, where you're having these crazy different changes in systems and mentalities and how a team should look. There's going to be growing pains there. And we've already seen through the first 18 games, like, that has already gotten so much better, and it's going to continue to get better. It's not a thing that's just going to stop today because we're 18 games in and it's November. They're going to continue to find their footing and to really fix a lot of these smaller fixable issues that this team has, that I think a lot of us can continue to see on, like, the Philadelphia game, I think, is an anomaly, but there's issues there where we saw a lot of problems, but toward the end of the game, it got corrected and things got a little bit better. But again, games like that are going to happen over the course of an 82-game season, Bunty. Like, this team, we've been preaching from the high heavens since before the season started. Like, the pieces are here and they're in the right places. It's just going to take time to put the puzzle together. And I think as fans, we want to get this puzzle put together right away when we can see the pieces and we can know where they go, and we know how the picture is going to look at the end of the puzzle. But that's not how it all comes together. Like, you're going to put pieces in the wrong spot. Pieces aren't going to fit. You're going to maybe lose one along the way. Like, progress isn't linear. I mean, we're circling back to the beginning of the episode with talking about like Levi, but the pieces are here. The team's around 500. They're going out west. They should win 2 out of those 3 at least. Hopefully. Hopefully. If I'm staying up to 2 a.m. to watch them, I at least give me a close game. Give me something enjoyable. But like, before we wrap things up, Bunty, I don't know if you want to hop into anything else here, but
all I'll say is this.
Yeah.
I mean, not the best starts of the year. Definitely disappointing, but look at the rest of the Eastern Conference.
Exactly.
There's no reason.
They're a couple points out of playoffs.
There's no reason to be panicking right now. They are in the group of teams that we all expected them to be bunched among prior to the season. I see no reason through 18 games to feel panicked about this team. And we all thought with Lindy Ruff, there was a possibility that it would take some time for them to figure things out under him, and that hopefully whenever they do, they'll be able to take that next step. You still hear Kevin Adams being aggressive on the phones, talking about adding someone. I do want to say one last thing. This is about a random topic. Remember when the Sabres were connected to Martin Nikas during the offseason.
Oh, yeah.
What was the narrative around the possibility of the Sabres trading for Nikas? You remember the narrative? I remember the narrative.
Yeah, tell me about that. What was the narrative?
Why would you trade for this guy and give him a $7-8 million contract when he had 53 points last year in 77 games and was a -9, and his analytics are horrible, and the guy seems to not be that great of a player? Well, you want to know what he's done so far this year in Carolina? It's 26 points in 16 games and is a +7. 26 points in 16 games. So, leads me to my next point. Sabres Twitter. You guys have been wrong on a lot of things lately. A lot of things. Maybe stop being so reactionary with the stupid takes. Seriously. Like, I've only had one really stupid take, and that's that I picked them to make the playoffs this year. But at least I'm a fan. I'm trying to be optimistic. I saw some reasons for positivity, and I went with it.
How dare us be happy?
But a lot of these takes are just absolutely ridiculous.
Crazy.
Martinez would have been a great move for the Sabres to try to pursue, but obviously he didn't want to come to Buffalo, and whether it was that or it was compensation or whatever, didn't happen. But we know Kevin Adams was interested. And then second take. Remember when Jeff Skinner was supposed to be scoring 40 goals with McDavid and Draisaitl? Well, he's going to have to score 37 in the last 64 games of the year, because right now he has 3 goals and 6 points in 18 games and is a -7. Maybe Kevin Adams realized that Jeff Skinner was done playing hockey and that he really didn't have much left in the tank.
That career plus-minus is crazy, by the way.
The reason -137 for his career. It's unbelievable. The reason I make these points is we freak out as a fan base about absolutely everything regarding this team. And you know what? When your team is bad every year, a lot of people feel like the pessimism is justified, because more likely than not, you're probably going to be right about the team falling short of the playoffs and not making it. But you know what? It doesn't take a genius to pick this team to miss the playoffs every single year. Any bum on the street, any idiot could pick this team to miss the playoffs and be right. That doesn't make you smart. And what has happened with this fan base is, because it's so easy to say this team isn't going to make the playoffs, a lot of our fans think it's also easy to hammer every single decision that they make. And guess what? A lot of their decisions are actually smart, and they actually have a lot of basis to it. And there's a lot of thought and logic involved. But I think there's a part of this fan base that is just angry and hates their lives and just wants to complain about everything. And it makes them feel better about whatever they're dealing with, because some people can't compartmentalize the failures of this organization. But you know what? There's reasons to look at this team and say they're not super far away from being at least a contender in the playoffs. I think the way they're built right now, we're going to be watching a team that could, not saying will be, could be in contention to the later parts of the season. And if they can make a move, or at least hope for a little bit of improvement from Cousins and Quinn, please, is that too much to ask for? We could be watching some fun hockey in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're on agreement here, where we, even looking at the past couple of years, where you completely tear down the entire foundation of where you thought the organization was going to be, getting rid of Eichel, Reinhart, that whole group, to not be completely in the basement after doing that. We should talk about that a bit more, because this team was able to improve after that. Granted, you see these guys go on to find success elsewhere, but they went to great places that they were going to win at. We're still building that foundation, and we're seeing that progression throughout the course of the season. We're going to go out west, just like Andy, win 2 out of 3 in the Warpath back on, because the Sabres are only 2 points out of the playoffs. So hypothetically, they win last night, we're talking about how they're in a wild card spot without a tiebreaker. Like, they're there right then. But that's not, the situation where they're going to be around 500 and they're going to be playing their best hockey. not in October. We've seen other years, not November. We've seen other years. They're going to be playing their best hockey when it matters most, where they're continuing to get better and they're going to win more, lots more, just like you can at Batavia Downs Gaming and Hotel. I've been Gatesy at Gates35. He is Mike Bunt. We are the Crossing Swords podcast. And there's only one thing we have to say. Let's go Sabres.